In the quiet, tree-lined suburb of Oak Ridge, Pennsylvania, the Miller estate stood as a testament to a bygone era of prosperity. A sprawling Victorian mansion, it had been the heart of the Miller family for 3 generations. But inside its grand walls, a different kind of story was unfolding. One of quiet sacrifice and loud, arrogant neglect. Elias Miller was the youngest of 3 siblings. While his older brother, Marcus, was a high-flying hedge fund manager in Manhattan, and his sister, Julian, was a celebrated fashion designer in Paris, Elias had stayed behind. He was the one who had put his own dreams of becoming an architect on hold to care for their aging parents, Thomas and Martha. Thomas had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's nearly a decade ago, and Martha's health had declined rapidly shortly after. For 10 years, Elias had been their primary caregiver. He was the one who managed their medications, took them to endless doctor's appointments, and sat with them through the long, confusing nights. He did it without complaint, driven by a deep, abiding love for the people who had given him everything. Marcus and Julian, however, viewed Elias's choice with a mixture of pity and contempt. To them, he was the failure, the one who couldn't cut it in the real world. They visited once a year, usually during the holidays, bearing expensive gifts that felt more like bribes for their absence. They would spend a few hours at the house, complaining about the drafty rooms and the depressing atmosphere, before rushing back to their glamorous lives. "You really should consider a facility for them, Elias," Marcus would say, checking his gold Rolex for the 10th time. "It's not efficient for you to be tied down like this. Think of your career." "I am thinking of them, Marcus," Elias would reply quietly. "They want to be home. This is where their memories are." Julianne would just sigh, adjusting her designer scarf. "It's just so dreary here. I don't know how you stand it." They never asked about Elias's life. They never noticed the sketches piled up in his small office, the intricate designs for sustainable housing that he worked on in the few quiet hours he had. They never saw the exhaustion in his eyes or the way his hands shook after a particularly difficult day with their father. To them, Elias was just a part of the furniture, a necessary but unremarkable fixture in their parents' lives. The end came on a rainy Tuesday in November. Martha passed away peacefully in her sleep, and Thomas followed her just 48 hours later. It was as if their souls were so intertwined that one couldn't exist without the other. Elias was devastated. Despite the years of preparation, the silence in the house was deafening. He handled all the arrangements, from the funeral services to the legal paperwork, while Marcus and Julian sent frantic emails about their pack schedules and the difficulty of finding last-minute flights. They arrived 2 days before the funeral, their presence like a whirlwind of self-importance. They took over the house, demanding high-speed internet and gourmet meals, seemingly oblivious to Elias's grief. "We need to discuss the estate, Elias," Marcus said the evening after the funeral, as they sat in the grand dining room. "The house is worth a fortune, and then there are the investments. We should get an appraisal immediately. Can we not wait until after we've had some time to mourn?" Elias asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Time is money, Elias." Julian chimed in, sipping a glass of expensive wine she'd brought with her. "We have lives to get back to. We can't stay in this drafty museum forever." They spent the next few days cataloging the furniture, arguing over who would get the antique silver and the original oil paintings. They treated the house like a carcass to be picked clean, showing no respect for the memories it held. Elias watched them in silence, a cold realization dawning on him. They didn't care about their parents. They didn't care about the house. They only cared about what they could get out of it. And they certainly didn't care about him. The reading of the will took place in the mahogany-paneled office of Arthur Sterling, the family's longtime attorney. Marcus and Julian sat at the front, their faces masks of professional concern, while Elias sat in the back, feeling like a stranger in his own family. Arthur Sterling cleared his throat, his expression grave. Thomas and Martha Miller were very clear about their wishes. He began, opening a thick manila envelope. They were deeply grateful for the lives they led and for the family they raised. Marcus leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. Julian tapped her manicured nails on the arm of her chair. "To my son, Marcus Miller, Arthur read, I leave the sum of $50,000. We hope this will help you remember that wealth is not measured solely by the balance of a bank account. Marcus's face went pale. 50,000? That's it? The estate is worth millions. To my daughter, Julian Miller, Arthur continued, I leave the sum of $50,000. We hope this will inspire you to find beauty in things that cannot be worn or displayed. Julian gasped, her hand flying to her throat. This is a joke. This has to be a joke. Arthur ignored them and turned to the final page. To my son Elias Miller, who gave up 10 years of his life to ensure our final years were filled with love, dignity, and peace, we leave the remainder of our estate. The room went deathly silent. The remainder, Marcus sputtered. What does that mean exactly? It means, Arthur said, his voice firm, that Elias inherits the house, all the investments, the family business interests, and the entirety of the liquid assets. The total valuation is approximately $12 million. Marcus and Julian erupted in a fury of indignation. They shouted about undue influence, mental incapacity, and legal challenges. They turned on Elias, their faces contorted with rage. You did this, Julian screamed. You manipulated them. You sat here for 10 years whispering in their ears, turning them against us. I did nothing but care for them, Elias said, his voice steady despite the chaos. I never asked for anything. I didn't even know what was in the will. We're contesting this, Marcus vowed, slamming his fist on the table. You won't see a dime of this money, Elias. We'll tie you up in court for years. The next 6 months were a nightmare of legal battles. Marcus and Julian hired the most expensive lawyers they could find, launching a full-scale assault on the will. They dragged Elias's name through the mud, accusing him of elder abuse and financial manipulation. Elias stayed in the house, his only solace the sketches he continued to create. He hired Arthur Sterling to defend him, but the pressure was immense. He was hounded by reporters, his private life picked apart by tabloids looking for a sensational story. But Elias had something Marcus and Julian didn't, the truth. And he had something else they hadn't counted on. A decade's worth of meticulously kept records. During the discovery phase of the trial, Arthur Sterling presented Elias's journals. For 10 years, Elias had documented every doctor's visit, every medication change, every conversation he'd had with his parents. He had kept receipts for every penny spent on their care, often using his own meager savings when the family accounts were tied up in Marcus's investment strategies. More importantly, Arthur presented video recordings. Elias had installed a discreet security system in the house years ago, primarily to monitor his father's movements and ensure his safety. The recordings captured the reality of life in the Miller house. Elias's patient care, his father's moments of clarity where he spoke of his love and gratitude for his youngest son, and the rare visits from Marcus and Julian. The videos showed Marcus shouting at his father for forgetting his name. They showed Julian rolling her eyes when her mother asked for a glass of water. They showed the cold, transactional nature of their visits, contrasted with Elias's unwavering devotion. The most damning evidence, however, was a recording from Thomas's final month. In a rare moment of lucidity, Thomas had sat down with Arthur Sterling, who had visited the house personally, and recorded a video statement. I am of sound mind, Thomas said in the video, his voice weak but clear, and I am making this choice because I have seen the true character of my children. Marcus and Julian have already received their inheritance in the form of the education and opportunities we provided, which they have used to build lives of greed and vanity. Elias is the only one who understood that family is not a burden, but a blessing. He is the true heir to the Miller legacy. The judge's ruling was swift and final. The will was upheld in its entirety. Marcus and Julian's claims were dismissed as baseless and malicious. They were ordered to pay Elias's legal fees, a sum that significantly ate into their own dwindling resources. But Elias wasn't interested in their money. He was interested in his parents' legacy. He sold the Miller estate, but not to a developer who would tear it down. He sold it to a non-profit organization that specialized in providing high-quality, home-like care for elderly patients with dementia. He used a significant portion of his inheritance to fund the project, ensuring that other families wouldn't have to make the same sacrifices he had. With the remaining funds, Elias finally pursued his dream. He founded Miller Sustainable Designs, an architectural firm dedicated to creating affordable, eco-friendly housing for low-income families. He used his parents' investments to seed the company, turning their wealth into a force for good in the community. Marcus and Julian's lives continued their downward spiral. Marcus's hedge fund collapsed under the weight of several lawsuits and his own poor decisions. Julian's fashion line went bankrupt after a series of scandals involving unethical labor practices. They tried to reach out to Elias, their emails filled with faux apologies and requests for loans. Elias didn't respond with anger. He responded with a single letter, written on his firm's stationery. "I have already given you what our parents intended." The letter read, "The opportunity to build something real. I hope you find the wisdom to use it this time." Years later, Elias stood on the balcony of a newly completed housing complex in downtown Philadelphia. It was a beautiful building, filled with light and green spaces, a testament to his vision and his parents' legacy. He looked out at the city, a sense of peace settling over him. He had lost 10 years of his life to caregiving, but he had gained something far more valuable: a sense of purpose and the knowledge that he had done right by the people he loved. He thought of his parents, of their quiet strength and their final act of justice. He thought of Marcus and Julian and the hollow lives they had chosen. And he realized that the unwanted son had become the most successful of them all, not because of the money he inherited, but because of the character he had built. The Miller name was no longer associated with corporate greed or fashion vanity. It was associated with compassion, integrity, and the belief that every person deserves to live their final days with dignity. Elias Miller, the invisible anchor, had finally found his wings. And in doing so, he had proven that the greatest inheritance is not what is left in a will, but what is left in the heart. As the sun began to set over the Philadelphia skyline, casting long, golden shadows across the rooftop garden of his latest project, Elias felt a familiar presence. It wasn't a ghost, but rather the weight of memories, the scent of his mother's lavender perfume, the firm grip of his father's hand before the tremors took hold. He realized that his work wasn't just about buildings. It was about creating spaces where memories could flourish, where families could find the same peace he had fought so hard to provide for his own. His firm, Miller Sustainable Designs, had grown beyond his wildest expectations. It was now a leader in the industry, known not just for its innovative designs, but for its commitment to social justice. Elias had stayed true to his roots, personally overseeing every project and ensuring that the needs of the residents were always the top priority. He had also become a mentor to young architects, particularly those from underprivileged backgrounds. He established a scholarship fund in his parents' names, providing the financial support he himself had once lacked. He taught them that architecture was more than just steel and glass. It was about empathy and the responsibility to build a better world. Marcus and Julian remained distant echoes in his life. He heard rumors of their struggles: Marcus working as a low-level consultant, Julian trying to reinvent herself as a social media influencer. He felt no malice toward them, only a profound sense of sadness for the opportunities they had squandered. They had been given everything, yet they had understood nothing. One evening, a young woman approached Elias at a charity gala. She was a resident of the first housing complex he had built, a single mother who had finally found stability and a sense of community. "Thank you, Mr. Miller," she said, her eyes shining with gratitude. "You didn't just give us a roof over our heads. You gave us a home. You gave us hope." Elias smiled, a warmth spreading through his chest. "It was my parents' dream," he said softly. "I'm just the one who built it." As he walked home through the quiet streets of Philadelphia, Elias realized that his journey had come full circle. He had started as the unwanted son, the one who stayed behind, but in staying, he had found his true self. He had learned that the most difficult paths often lead to the most beautiful destinations. He looked up at the stars, a silent prayer of thanks on his lips. He was no longer the invisible anchor. He was the architect of a legacy that would endure long after he was gone. And in the quiet of the night, He could almost hear his father's voice, clear and strong, whispering in his ear, "Well done, son. Well done." The success of Miller Sustainable Designs began to attract international attention. Elias was invited to speak at conferences in London, Tokyo, and Berlin. He shared his philosophy of empathetic architecture, arguing that the goal of any building should be to enhance the human experience and foster a sense of belonging. His words resonated with a new generation of designers who were disillusioned with the sterile, profit-driven nature of modern architecture. They saw in Elias a man who had successfully integrated business success with social responsibility, a man who had turned a personal tragedy into a global movement. Back in Oak Ridge, the Miller Care Center had become a model for elderly care across the country. It was a place of light and laughter, where residents were treated with the respect and dignity they deserved. Elias visited often, sitting with the patients and listening to their stories. He saw in their eyes the same spark he had seen in his father's, a reminder of the enduring power of the human spirit. He also stayed in touch with Arthur Sterling, who had become a close friend and confidant. Arthur had retired from his law practice but remained an active advisor to Elias's firm. They would often sit in Arthur's garden, sipping tea and reflecting on the events that had changed their lives. "You know, Elias," Arthur said one afternoon, "your parents would be so proud of you, not just because of the buildings, but because of the man you've become. You took their love and you multiplied it. You turned their legacy into a blessing for thousands of people." Elias nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I only did what I thought was right, Arthur. I didn't have a grand plan. I just wanted to honor them." "And that," Arthur replied, "is why you succeeded, because your heart was in the right place." As Elias entered his 60s, he began to think about the future of his firm and his legacy. He wanted to ensure that Miller Sustainable Designs would continue its mission long after he retired. He decided to transition the company into an employee-owned cooperative, giving his staff a stake in the business and a voice in its direction. He also focused on his final project, the Miller Institute for Empathetic Design. It would be a research and training center dedicated to advancing the principles of social and environmental justice in architecture. He envisioned it as a place where architects, sociologists, and community leaders could collaborate on innovative solutions to the world's most pressing housing challenges. The groundbreaking ceremony for the Institute was a major event, attended by dignitaries from around the world. But for Elias, the most important guests were the residents of his housing complexes and the staff of the Miller Care Center. They were the ones who truly understood the impact of his work. As he stood at the podium, looking out at the diverse crowd, Elias felt a profound sense of gratitude. He thought of the young man who had sat in a small office in Oak Ridge, sketching designs by the light of a single lamp. He thought of the 10 years of sacrifice and the legal battles that had followed. And he realized that every struggle, every tear, had been worth it. "Architecture is not just about buildings," Elias said in his speech, his voice strong and steady. "It's about people. It's about creating a world where everyone has a place to call home, where everyone is treated with dignity, and where love is the foundation of everything we build. This institute is not just my legacy. It's our legacy. It's a blueprint for a better future." In the final years of his life, Elias retired to a small, sustainable cottage he had designed himself on the outskirts of Philadelphia. It was a simple, beautiful home, surrounded by a lush garden and filled with the books and sketches he loved. He spent his days gardening, reading, and hosting small gatherings for his friends and former colleagues. He remained an active advisor to the Miller Institute, but he was content to let the next generation take the lead. One afternoon, he received a surprise visit. It was a young man, perhaps in his early 20s, who introduced himself as Thomas Miller. He was Marcus's grandson. "I've heard so many stories about you, Uncle Elias," the young man said, his voice filled with a mixture of curiosity and respect. "My grandfather, he didn't talk about you much, but my father told me everything. He told me about the will and the trial and the incredible things you've done." Elias smiled, gesturing for the young man to sit down. "It's good to meet you, Thomas. I didn't know Marcus had a grandson." "He passed away last year," Thomas said quietly. "He died broke and alone. But before he went, he gave me this. He pulled a small, worn sketchpad from his bag. It was one of Elias's old sketchpads from the Oak Ridge house. He said he stole it from your office years ago. Thomas continued. He said he wanted to understand how you did it, how you built something so meaningful while he was busy chasing shadows. Elias took the sketchpad, his fingers tracing the familiar lines of his early designs. He felt a sudden, sharp pang of sadness for his brother. Marcus had spent his entire life looking for something he already had, if only he'd had the eyes to see it. And what about you, Thomas? Elias asked. What are you doing with your life? I'm an architecture student, Thomas said, his eyes lighting up. I want to study at the Miller Institute. I want to build things that matter. Elias felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The circle was complete. The Miller legacy was not just about the past. It was about the future. It was about the power of love to transform lives and the enduring strength of the human spirit. He looked at his grandnephew, a young man who carried his father's name and his own passion for design, and he knew that the unwanted son had finally found the most precious inheritance of all. The knowledge that his life had made a difference, and that his legacy would live on in the hearts and minds of those who followed in his footsteps as the sun set over the garden, casting a warm, golden glow over the two men. Elias felt a profound sense of peace. He had lived a long, full life, a life of sacrifice and triumph, of justice and love. And as he closed his eyes, he could almost hear the echoes of the past, the voices of his parents whispering in the wind. Well done, son. Well done. The story of Elias Miller was a testament to the fact that the most powerful force in the universe is not wealth or status, but the quiet, unwavering strength of the human heart. It was a reminder that justice, though it may take time, always finds its way. And it was a celebration of the fact that the greatest legacies are not those written in wills, but those etched in the lives of the people we touch. Elias Miller, the invisible anchor, the architect of change, the unwanted son. He had finally found his place in the world. And in doing so, he had built a legacy that would shine brightly for generations to come.